Hello, I'm Valerie PA, and this is IOHR TV. My guest today is Ahmad Obali, founder and managing director of Gunaz TV, a satellite TV network which broadcasts from Chicago to the northwestern region of Iran, known as Iranian Azerbaijan, home to Iran's largest minority group, the Azerbaijanis, also known as the Azeris. In late 1978, the Iran civil unrest and demonstrations against the corruption of the Shah had grown into mass strikes and street protests which paralyzed the country. A loose coalition of Islamist, secular and leftist organizations, workers and students came together to push for change. By January 1979, the Shah went into exile, and by February, Ayatollah Khomeini had returned to Iran and the Islamic Republic was declared on the 1st of April. But the post-revolution world did not deliver the vision of many. Khomeini became supreme leader in December, and soon anyone who did not agree with the new regime was forced to flee Iran or face persecution. Ahmad Obali, welcome and thanks for joining us on IOHR TV. So as a teenager in the early 1980s, how did you end up fleeing from Iran, embarking on a journey that spanned 4 years and ending up in America as a refugee?
So I was a teenager when I participated in that so-called revolution against the Shah, against Pahlavis. Of course, we didn't know what we were doing, teenagers, right? So after the revolution, we realized this is not really what people wanted. A lot of us were disappointed. So we turned against the Islamic Republic. So we were known as anti-Islamic Republic in high school. People, students knew each other. So I was arrested in the summer of 1981, and they put me in prison with no specific charges.
The leaders of the new Islamic regime feared an Azeri drive for independence, so began to push for the forced integration of Azeri culture, language, and education. Anyone who protested was seen as a threat. How long did they keep you locked up for protesting?
So I was there for about 52 days. My mother had a heart attack, and they couldn't really prove anything against me because I didn't belong to any group. So we were able to use my mother's heart attack as an excuse, saying that if I don't get out of jail, she could die because she heard that I've been arrested. And during that time, people that were arrested were mostly going to either die or executed or given long-term prison sentences. So we put up about equivalent of $15,000 cash bond, and my older brother as another bond, personal bond. So if I don't go back to prison to the court, then my brother would go instead. So we left for a couple of days and we never went back.
Do you think you'd have been given bail today?
No, not at all. Well, today they don't arrest people for being a leftist or any of the charges that they were trying to put against me, except MEK. And if one is arrested as a sympathizer to MEK, they won't release him at all. Chances are they'll be killed or given long-term sentence, unless that person turns around and becomes their informant and works with them.
So what about your family at home?
My family were summoned to the police or security apparatus. Obviously, they claim that they don't know anything about me, and they didn't know much about me because when we escaped, we didn't tell them what are we going to do. We just said we'll be away for a while, and once we went to Turkey, we told them that we are in Turkey now. So they were kind of surprised. After a while, they just gave up on family members, and I think right before Khomeini died, he ordered amnesty for family members of of the guilty ones like me. So he realized that by arresting more family members, they're creating more enemies. So it's not to their advantage. So he basically said, leave the family members alone.
So you finally arrived in Chicago as a refugee. You went to school to study cinematography, survived working in a restaurant flipping burgers, and then went on to buy your own. What happened next?
So I always wanted to make documentaries on human rights, prisoners, and things that are important to our people. Wanted to do something. So early in, towards the end of my school in early 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Azerbaijan became an independent country from the Soviet Republic, one of the Soviet republics. So we were following up on the events in Baku. That was kind of inspiration for me and for many to also become a little bit more active now that we have part of our land is independent. So we formed an Azerbaijani cultural association in Chicago. So we worked with community members in Midwest area, from different states until 1997, when the first World Azerbaijani Congress was formed in Los Angeles.
You rose to be chairman of the World Azerbaijani Congress, but eventually turned to set up a satellite TV channel. How did that come about?
I just took upon myself to set it up, put initial funding from my own pocket. And then, so my goal was to have a television for about 14 months, maybe a year and a half. I thought that's good enough, would be good enough. Then I realized after about a few months, the funding that I have doesn't cover for even a year. So television is expensive, especially satellite TV. So I asked for help on live television. People helped, and we got more funding, and it's been going since.
Gunas TV was born, and you now reach 12 to 15 million people in the Azerbaijani provinces of Iran. One of the things I loved about the website was that you list your human rights goals. You say you seek a world free of discrimination, inequality, and racism, believing that all people are equal in terms of individual and social freedoms, as well as law. Brilliant. Now, very few TV stations have human rights targets. Did you create Gunaz TV as an advocacy tool, and why do you think so many people watch it?
Well, I think when we talk about people understanding or appreciating, if they are Azerbaijanis, yes, I would say yes. Unfortunately, we are small and not powerful enough to cover the entire country. I would have loved to cover the entire country, and I couldn't. So what I did in return, on Sundays, I gave certain hours to other minority groups in Iran for free, so they can have their own program weekly, Arabs, Baluchis, Turkmens. So of all the other groups, only Turkmens and Arabs still continue. And they are not paying a dime. They just use our waves, television waves, to have their own program to cover human rights. And all I've asked them is to make sure that they don't promote violence. They don't focus on violence. But other than that, they are free to do anything they want. It's their time. So, and I think mostly they cover human rights.
You stated the aims to fight against cultural genocide and language assimilation and to push for press freedom. Can you tell me more about your approach to do this, and has it resonated with your audience? What kind of pushback do you get?
People that don't want minorities have their right equate minority rights to separatism. For instance, they can blame people, some of the people that don't like what we do, they blame us to be an agent of different countries. CIA is very convenient. Mossad is convenient to blame for, or they blame us to be like pan-Turkist, meaning, we want to have all the Turks to unite and then form one country. That none of those are true. But what I realized is, instead of spending time in responding to every single accusations that come towards us, we should focus on doing in what we believe. That's human rights.
Absolutely. You faced death threats and had the Eurasian regime coming after you for your work. How do you cope with that?
When I was arrested as a teenager, they really beat me up, and we were tortured heavily in detention. I wasn't in jail per se; it was detention. And after 3 or 4 days, what they did was sort of irrelevant. I got used to being beaten up, so it really didn't bother me as much. After I set up this television station, I was accused of many things, and then they threatened me, my family members, and they broke our windows at some point in Chicago. After a while, I realized that if I play like I'm scared, they're gonna get bolder, and so I sort of went on air and I said, look, I'm not afraid. This is my address. I mean, whoever wants to come and do whatever they want, they're free to do. So obviously, it's not going to happen. But it is. I just wanted to give the signal that anything that they do is not going to prevent me from doing what I like to do.
Although Iranian Azerbaijanis are the largest minority group in Iran, making up 60% of the total population, the regime continues its cultural genocide against Azeri people. But we hear almost nothing about that from the UN or other international bodies. Why is that?
The human rights organizations, including UN, does not focus on issues that we like them to. And I think if they focus on the method that Azerbaijanis have chosen, which is civil movement, civil disobedience, would be a better example rather than focusing on, let's say, violence. If you focus on violence, indirectly it is promoted. If you focus on civil disobedience or civil movement, that's promoted. People need to be inspired, knowing that they have organizations supporting their cause. So even when human rights organizations don't focus on, let's say, Azerbaijanis, I'll give you one example. Abbas Lassani is one of our prisoners. He's been in prison many times. And then I think so far he has spent over 10 years in prison. Mm. He was detained for asking for education in mother language. He was charged with vague charges. Iran usually uses vague charges, propaganda against the system, and so forth. So Abbas Lassani was sentenced for 8 years, and then he appealed. He appealed to higher court. The higher court increased his sentence to 16 years. Can you imagine?
It's just a suppression method, isn't it?
We have many people that are sentenced to 8, 10, 15 years that they're all asking is for implementation of the 15th Amendment of the Constitution, which gives us right to study or education in our mother language. That's all they're asking for, nothing else. But they think that if the education is given, the right to education is given, then more rights will be asked and the country will split apart. And that's what but more importantly, they think that the Iranian government's mentality is this. If you give in to one demand, they become bolder. So the best way is not to give in, but suppress them. Kill them if you can, but they can't kill Abbas Lassani because he hasn't done anything other than asking for human rights. So they just give him long-term sentences to basically set an example for others, telling them, look, if you do the same thing, you'll be sentenced for 15 years imprisonment.
So we've seen an Iranian newspaper recently printing a report from an official recording the drastic underreporting of coronavirus, which put potential infection rates as high as 6.5 million. The newspaper was shut down the very next day. We've been covering the impact of coronavirus on prisons, in particular in Evin prison. What have you seen?
Evin prison is notorious for many things, and now it is becoming notorious for coronavirus infection, becoming a center for coronavirus infection. We have three civil rights activists in Evin prison. One of them was a teacher at university before he was arrested years back, and then he was released after, I think, a year in prison, and then detained again and released again, detained. Now he's detained, and he is given I think, 7.5 years imprisonment for basically trying to teach on his own, trying to teach Azerbaijani language to school children, not school children, but kids. Along with him, Mr. Nadarli and Manaf Nadarli, and also Sheikh Behnam Sheikhi. They all are held in 8th ward of the Evin prison. And based on the reports that we're receiving, the 8th ward is now more than 80% infected with coronavirus.
What can international organizations do to support minority groups like the Azerbaijanis?
The international community, even if they want to, they really don't have the mechanism to go to the country and start making changes. But the international community, especially human rights organizations, do have one asset, that's coverage. I mean, if you can just give coverage to everybody that is in need of coverage, that's all they ask for. We know that you cannot get a plane ticket, go to Tehran and open the prison and then let them go free. You can't. It's impossible, right? But you can cover them, and that's all they're asking for, coverage.
How difficult is it for someone sitting in Iran to watch Gunaz TV? What sort of censorship do you face?
It is beyond that now. The government used to arrest people for watching us or other, as they called it, opposition groups. We are more of a human right based or ethnic right based television channel. So the government tried to prevent people from watching, and the more they did, actually it backfired on them. And to a certain degree, where the Iranian broadcasting head admitted that more than 75% of the people watch other televisions rather than Iranian televisions. So they would go and confiscate satellite dishes from roofs, and that backfired. People would replace them in a matter of day. And then, so now they kind of given up on who watches. We get not only people watching us, but we have on a daily basis, we have people calling from Iran and from Azerbaijani parts and expressing their opinion in opposition to the government. So to a certain degree, that fear is gone from people, and the government is giving up on confiscating television receivers or satellite dishes.
With Iran's mastery of cyber attacks and cybersecurity, they still haven't done what China does and try and seal off access to the internet or to TV. Why is that?
Iran is unable to do what China does. China does have the Chinese version of Facebook, Chinese version of WhatsApp, and so forth, and they're able to control many things. Iran doesn't have that capability yet as far as internet. So they're trying hard to come up with, as they call it, intranet, where it is just within the country. But that hasn't been successful. They tried to jam our television or all the opposition televisions, including BBC and VOA, especially in 2008, in 2008, the Green Movement, when they jammed the satellite itself. Like Gunas, we have been forced to change our satellite provider. I think, if I'm not mistaken, 12, 13 times. But Iran still jams us locally, but locally is not as effective as satellite itself. So if they jam us in one part of Tabriz, the other part knows, or people record the programs and then pass it to their friends. So then they sort of have given up, unless it is a very special night, specific programs, they jam us. Otherwise, they've given up on that too, to a certain degree. Again, not completely, but at least they don't jam as much.
I'm assuming that they're also very sensitive to the coverage of prisoners such as Dr. Jajali. I mean, he's from Tabriz and he sits on death row. What kind of censorship do you face?
No, they are sensitive. We have covered Ahmad Jalali, and they I know that when we covered them, maybe we're discussing that specific issue, we were jammed as well. So I know that they're sensitive towards issues like this.
So what happens next for you and Gunaz TV?
Continue what we do. You know, Gunas is basically a tool of communication. We have volunteers sending us programs, sending us news, articles, pictures, videos from within Iran, and we love to continue what we've been doing. But I think we are focusing also at the same time, we're focusing on organizing our people. So political organizations, cultural organizations, any way we can, people need to be organized. Haphazardly, we will not get anywhere. Even if people know their rights, they need to be organized to achieve something. So we're using Gunas as a tool to organize our people as well.
Ahmad Obali, thank you so much for sharing the work that you do with Gunaz TV, highlighting the important issues surrounding the Iranian Azerbaijanis. Thank you for joining us at IOHR TV. It's been a pleasure.